On behalf of STP, thank you for this invitation. It's really delightful to be in this space once again and to be able to present what for us has been a truly once-in-a-lifetime professional endeavor. We're going to go through this from the big picture down to maybe some very small details. Take about 35, 40 minutes, and we'll have an opportunity to do questions afterwards. Before we get going, I want to make sure and recognize our client, which in this case is both the CIM Group of Los Angeles and Gall & Company of Chicago. We have been associated with them on many projects, some of which Laura just mentioned, and it's through their efforts that Tribune Tower was purchased and transformed in the manner that we're going to show you tonight. We also want to recognize our collaboration with Vinci Camp Architects. Some of you may be familiar with an internationally recognized leader in historic preservation. They collaborated with us on many of the early big decisions for the project. And interestingly enough, as some of you may know, this was a project that they undertook in the late 1980s when the Tribune Tower finally received its Chicago Landmark designation. And they were responsible for bringing back some of, most notably, the Hall of Inscriptions, the lobby that's immediately off of Michigan Avenue, back to its original condition. So let's just get into it. What is this project all about? Well, the building itself is, it's 162 luxury condominiums. We'll get into the specifics of that later. It's also about 50,000 square feet of retail. Because couldn't have picked the worst time to do retail, luxury retail on Michigan Avenue. And it's a 300-car garage, which is a private garage. But it's more than the tower itself. It's also the complete redevelopment of Pioneer Court. Pioneer Court is almost a 2-acre public space, which was created in 1964. This particular project undertook to completely redesign over 2/3 of that plaza to turn it into a public green space rather than basically a hardscape that it was up through the mid-2000s. Lastly, it's also a very, very long project for any architectural firm. This project for us is a 7-year duration, which is a considerable amount of time to be involved in a project. We began looking at this with our clients in 2015, and final completion really did not occur until just last summer. It's hard to talk about Chicago Tribune Tower without understanding its urban context and the role that the tower has had in defining its location. That really was the nexus of Michigan Avenue and Chicago River, which is, one of the iconic American public spaces. The Tribune Tower is a contributing building to what is known as the Michigan Lacquer Historic District, which is part of the national, placed on the National Register, I believe, in the late 70s. It consists of a number of buildings which are identified here, 333 North Michigan, the Cordwell building, London Guarantee, the Mather Tower, 35, Striker, also known as the Jewelers Building. Of course, As part of the Burning Plan of Chicago, the plan envisioned the extension of Michigan Avenue north up to the lake Oak Street. This isn't the original plan of Buenz plan, but it's what was ultimately promoted. And what you see is that Michigan Avenue was widened, and what was known as Pine Street north of Michigan Avenue was also widened into its boulevard configuration. Also, as part of the Burning Plan, as you know, the approaches to the river were raised. You have the two-story elevation for Wacker Drive, and the same on the Michigan Avenue side. Ultimately, what this did was sort of create the ultimate framework for the future Pioneer Court, which we'll get into a little later. Another thing is, I'm sure many of you know that's very important about the Tribune Tower, is that what most people think of as the Tribune Tower is the result of a 1922 international architectural competition. The purpose of that competition was to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Chicago Tribune. And the stated goal, which is kind of written here, paraphrased out of the request for proposal originally, was to create the world's most beautiful office building. $100,000 was offered in prize, a fair amount of money at that point in time, 1922. $50,000 to the first place winner, which was the collaboration between John B. Howe and Ray Hood. The notable runner-ups were the second place submission by Elio Sermon and the third place by Hubbard. Roche. The inspiration was sort of a neo-Gothic French language, which ultimately became woven into not just the tower, but many of the contributing buildings. Important to understand some of the chronology of how this complex of buildings evolved. First, it was the creation of the printing facilities, which did not sit immediately on Michigan Avenue, but was off to the side. This was done by the architect Jarvis Hunt. It was completed in 1920. And here we can see sort of the context of the area at that time. Here are the editor and publisher of the Chicago Tribune setting the cornerstone, which has an interesting backstory we'll talk about a little bit later. Then there was the Tribune competition, which resulted in the tower and its completion immediately to the west of the printing building. The Tribune, being an evolving media company, started their expansion in radio with the creation of the WGN radio building immediately to the north of the tower. And its original purpose was to actually be a performing theater for radio plays and dramas. It started off as basically a 3-story building with a mansard roof, which sort of disappeared in the late 50s. We'll get into that in a little bit. Finally, in the 1950s, as the Tribune expanded into television, they created a significant addition along Illinois Street with a building which was 8 stories along Michigan Avenue, 8 stories to the east, which was offices and television production facilities. Prior to the construction of the Equitable Building, much of the land immediately to the east of Michigan Avenue was at a lower elevation. It was basically a service path to get trains to and from the lakefront for light manufacturing and warehousing. When the Equitable Building was constructed, designed by SLM in 1964-65, a cooperative effort was put together between the Equitable Assurance Company and the Chicago Tribune companies to create what ultimately became Pioneer Plaza, which is the first time that the plaza was actually raised up to the level of Michigan Avenue and started to build down to the intersection of the river. So what we see over time, a period of over 5 decades, is a evolution of a stylistically unified complex of buildings, which really was for us sort of a touchstone moment as we began to consider what should be the approach for this project. In 2015, plans were announced by the Chicago Tribune companies to sell. Offering memorandums were put together. A number of firms and number of development design teams were put together to investigate this. I put this up here to emphasize that the original approach in the sales brochure was to maximize square foot development throughout the entire site and only preserve that which was listed as a Chicago landmark, which was the majority of the tower. A frightening proposition. It's important to understand the context of what was actually designated as Chicago landmark. This is how the landmark designation was written in 1989. The areas that are shown in yellow were the only areas that were protected. So portions of the 1925 tower, the facades were not protected. The plant building was not protected. The radio building, the television building were not protected. You know, one of the signature pieces of the Tribune Tower itself, which is its 22-story bustle that faces out towards Michigan Avenue, was not protected. However, the landmark designation did extend to the Hall of Inscriptions and the 2 elevator lobbies immediately off of the Hall of Inscriptions. SCB pursued a great number of alternatives, some of which actually resembled those in the initial offering memo. Our clients finally came to the decision that they were going to limit the development program to being luxury condominium only. And it was sort of at that point that we sat down, took a deep breath, and said, okay, although more than half of the buildings are not protected, they have no historic designation, what is the right thing to do for the neighborhood and Chicago and this important public plaza of Pioneer Court and the Chicago River? that's the point at which we said we need to find a way to preserve the facades, because that's what the community and the city are going to see as the contributing essence of this complex. But how do you do that with floor plates that were basically designed for large office use or studio use? These floor plates simply don't work for residential use. They ranged anywhere from 64,000 square feet at the base of the building up through as small as 1,800 square feet at the very top. So the aha moment was, let's carve out the courtyard. Let's carve out the middle of the building. Let's create a courtyard. And by taking out basically the mass in the middle of the building and rebuilding that mass as a 4-story addition on top of the building, we can preserve what people understand to be the architectural character of the building, but make it work as a residential project. So the diagram you see at the top is, although it's not the final diagram, it basically shows the original concept for carving out the center of this thing so that we could create kind of logically wide floor plates for residential use. The next series of slides will show you what that actually looks like in construction. So here it is in 2016 or so, and here we are taking it down, putting up the addition, starting to create the courtyard, rebuilding the top of the plant building to include a new swimming pool. And, you know, that's what it looks like now. So I think another aspect of this which is worth mentioning is that there are many, many different studies that were done for what the architectural character of this should be. There were very modern, contemporary approaches, and there were very traditional approaches. In the end, we consciously decided that we were going to treat the interior of the courtyard as though it were stylistically derived from the tower itself. And the addition on the television building to the north, which has sort of the larger penthouse units, it carries up the architectural lines, but it's treated differently in a kind of a more glassy expression. In addition to the big move of carving out the courtyard, there was a lot of modification to the street level facades of the television building, the plant building, in order to make them usable for retail. Although we won't go into it in great detail, basically we had to take out the second floor of almost the entire building in order to create space that was appropriately high for commercial use, retail use. And it required, you know, a redesign of the facades, which we can see here along Pioneer Court, in conjunction with the rebuilt Chicago Tribune sign. You can see the before and the after. You'll notice that these vertical elements, like the tower, which was originally kind of a service elevator and a water tower, that was preserved, turned into a porch, if you will, off of the floor, off of the sun deck terrace up here. And even though, as you look at this, you'll see that there were a lot of opaque, blind windows. We came back and opened up the blind windows because the architect who did the
recladding of the building in 1960 was very careful to kind of scribe into the stone where the windows should be, even though there weren't any windows. So we just sort of took it the next step and put the windows in for him. So here's kind of an example of these taller storefronts. The same general approach needed to happen for the radio building. The previous iteration, I think you saw the 3-story WGN radio auditorium. Well, in the 1960s, a 4th story was added and it was turned into office space. But it still had sort of 1-story space down here on the ground floor. So we, again, at significant structural engineering effort, took out these floors and enlarged the openings. And in this view, you can see the larger openings and then the 4-story addition beyond. And then as we go around to the north side along Illinois Street was very much kind of service oriented. There were a lot of ventilation shafts. It had always been a service street, not a street you wanted to be on. What we ultimately did was create a second lobby in addition to the Hall of Inscriptions. That second lobby is connected together on the inside, as you'll see in a little bit. And there's a new entrance created, which is really just a private residential lobby on that side, which you see an early rendering of right there. You got to get the cars in and out of here somehow. So where do you put the cars in the first place? So everything below Michigan Avenue level was the printing plant. Printing operations ceased there in the late 80s and moved over to the location along the Chicago River. And it sat disused with some attempts to make it kind of unique office space around the late 1990s. What we did was basically go through in this green area that you see here, which is sitting down below the raised Michigan Avenue level, is turn that into parking, which was no small feat because we basically had to work with the structure of the columns as they existed, but we had to basically tear out all the floors and rebuild the floors in order to get the kind of right floor-to-floor heights for parking. And in order to make it feel like you weren't driving through the bowels of Michigan Avenue, we did a kind of fairly exuberant vehicular entry and motor court. A project like this requires a lot of cooperation and agreement with the historic preservation folks down in the city of Chicago. We worked with them very closely, along with Phil Hamp of Vinci Hamp. One of their big concerns had to do with the replacement of windows. All the windows were replaced. It was the second time the windows had been replaced. This is the third time the windows had been replaced. The second time was in the mid-'80s. And it was very important for, obviously, to sort of maintain the profiles, sight lines, the dimensions of the windows, but the operations of the windows were going to have to change because these windows are enormous. They're 4 feet wide and almost 9 feet tall, and you're just not going to raise these things up by yourself. So you see, an original window on the left there, but on the right is a little picture of what ultimately happened, which is we replicated the appearance of the window, but had the window designed so that it could basically fold out like an awning, so people could easily just sort of, with a little crank operation, open the windows. Another aspect of that was a little difficult is at this zone in the building, this was the original location, this slot for the exit stairs for the tower. The exit stairs for the tower were actually out in the air. You couldn't see it, but they were just you had to walk outside, then you'd get into the stair and go down. Well, that wasn't going to work because we had to move the stairs. So all the windows in that smoke tower zone were replaced as well. This is like an original configuration for the stair, and then the stair went away and these were turned into various rooms on the inside. So that's it for the outside. Let's talk a little bit about the inside. As I mentioned earlier, the Hall of Inscriptions and the 2 elevator lobbies were part of the landmark designation and were protected, so nothing could change in those locations. Here we see the lobby, as it basically exists today, and then one of the Howes and Hood early original pencil sketches for the entry and Aesop's window here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We couldn't change the appearance of the elevator lobbies, but for a high-rise building, how you manage stairs and elevators is a very important, serious thing to undertake. The diagram down here at the bottom shows you the original elevator plan for the building, and it was sort of divided into a low-rise and high-rise zone, 9 different elevators, and then a boiler flue. Service elevators were located someplace else. Well, in the city of Chicago, you got to have one elevator that goes from the very bottom of the building to the very top of the building. The only place that physically existed in the building was at the location of the boiler flue, because it was the only geometric location in the building that went from the bottom to the very top. So we had to negotiate with historic preservation folks to take that out and rebuild that as an elevator lobby. So here it is as it was in 2016. This is an original little service closet there in front of the boiler flue. And here's how it appears today with a new elevator opening and doors that match the original elevator opening. Now on the other side of that is a group of elevators which were really no longer needed. We only needed to have one on that side, and it hides behind this door, and it's a service elevator. But that door that you see right there is not into the elevator itself. It's into a little lobby because the service elevator is very, very big. Now, you see the door opening here, technical drawing for it. This door is just a remarkable labor of love. We, working with the general contractor, located this gentleman, guy by the name of Roger Carlson. He is the owner and operator of Ephraim Forge down in Frankfort, Illinois. And Roger undertook a 1.5 year effort to replicate this door to match the other doors. And you can see his tools of the trade here. His forge, it's a real forge, folks. And he's down there, hammering stuff out. He's got drawings of the panels there, and he's showing us how he's replicating it. And this is him sort of stamping out designs with this. He's got this kind of foot operated hammer, and you can see him inscribing into sheets of metal the designs. It was a really remarkable experience to participate in. So here is the overall floor plan for the first floor. Here we are inside of the Hall of Inscriptions. This is the rear side of the ESOP window, and that's located here in plan. We connected back through the building over to Illinois Street. This is the Illinois Street entrance here, and an Illinois Street lobby experience. Little bit, not too much. It's about architectural planning. When you do a residential building, you don't go out of your way to make a whole bunch of different unit types. You try to find the fewest number you can do. That just wasn't going to happen in this building. So there's 162 units, but there's 55 different unit types. 55 or 50, yeah, 50. It was again, a whole team of folks working on this. And this is a highly iterative thing, and it really took most of the time. But the units are quite stunning. We'll see some photographs of them in a second. They range anywhere from 1 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms, 1,100 square feet up to 4,400 square feet. And won't go into this in detail, but this is just a very quick run through the drawings that show you how the basic organization of the building stacks up. Each different color is a different kind of unit type. So here we are down in sort of the courtyard portion of the building, where we're in the full courtyard. An entire range of unit types, some that even actually go through completely with exposure to Michigan Avenue and the courtyard. So we get up to the swimming pool level, which is level 7. We get into sort of an L-shaped configuration with the pool, which is completely enclosed, a 75-foot pool, and then sun terraces and outdoor dining facilities on the east side. As we get up to the penthouse level and the addition, the tower starts to break away to its 1925 shape, with 3 units per floor and then larger penthouse units. And then up into the very top of the tower, some instances we've got, this is a particularly noteworthy floor. There are only 2 units per floor here. It's that really kind of right up here at the top. And then actually there was a portion of the building right here that has duplex units. There's only a handful of duplex, I mean 2-story units. In this instance, this was originally the executive dining room in this area. So there are 2 units that have double height spaces with just really spectacular views out to the lake. And then up in the very, very top of the building, the crown, we call them the crown units. These are the units in back of the buttresses at the top of the building. There's only 5 units up there. The first 2 floors are a duplex. The last 2 floors are a duplex. And then the 3 in between are single flats. There's a guy sitting here. Where's Larry? Larry's back there someplace. Larry Nord, there he is. That gentleman up there helped make it possible for us to achieve this plan, because he led the charge at City Hall to convince them that we could keep those 2 stairs. Thank you, Larry. A little bit of flavor for the interior. So here are units on the inside. We worked cooperatively with the Getty's group here in Chicago. They did the selection of finishes, but the planning was completely SCB, with Getty's basically selecting finishes and appliances and fittings. This is out in the corner, looking at, those are those big windows I was talking about earlier, looking back over the intersection of the river and Pioneer Court. You might think that in a project of this scale that these units were built out as white boxes. That wasn't the case. You would expect folks to come in and kind of have a clean slate and do their own thing. But a decision was made to completely build them out. And I think we're close to 80% sales right now, so very, very few modifications happening to the units. That's those duplex units that were originally the executive dining room. And then up at the very, very top in the crown units. There's a significant amount of amenity space in the project, 55,000 square feet in total. It exists on many different levels. There's level 2 is a fitness, level 3 is social rooms, meeting spaces, party rooms, all connected to the courtyard and to Michigan Avenue. And then level 7 we talked about is the pool, and then level 25, which you see over here, is what's called the Crown Terrace now. We just kind of peel this back a little bit. This is kind of what the look and feel of the level 2 and level 3 spaces are like. Here we see this is the amenity space at level 3. It's opening up to Michigan Avenue and to the courtyard. You can see this is part of that space there. You can see the courtyard approach to the entry, which is right there. This is an interesting little piece. This is the McCormick fireplace. Robert McCormick had his office along with his brother-in-law Patterson, the publisher, on the 24th floor. We tried as best we could to save those spaces. It wasn't going to work, but we were able to take architectural fragments, specifically some of the paneling and this really spectacular fireplace, and rebuild it down at the 3rd floor as part of the amenity rooms. This is level 7, which was originally just sort of mechanical space back in here, and the Tribune sign was in that location, but it was literally just kind of bolted to the side of a mechanical room wall. We'll talk about the sign a little bit later, but we fought hard to keep it. We wanted to keep it because we wanted it to go right back where it was and kind of function as an architectural artifact, but have it be the signature element of this pool level experience. Level 25, when the tower was built, it actually functioned as a public observatory. You could go up there and it's a little like sightseeing binoculars, and you could look down. It ultimately became an event space in the 70s and 80s. But here it was completely transformed into a private party room for the residents of the tower. Quite a remarkable space. Talking a little bit about the public spaces, I want to talk a little bit about Pioneer Court. Earlier we were talking about the historic Michigan Wacker Historic District. Well, before it was that, it was just the raised portion of Michigan Avenue, and it was a path of rail service out to Ogden Slip in the riverfront. In fact, ever wonder about that gap between the Wrigley buildings? There's a train that went through that gap. Okay, and that train serviced these buildings out here, but until recently it was actually servicing the Sun-Times and the Tribune, because this is how they got their paper. In the redesign of Pioneer Court, we worked very closely with the Department of Planning. Commissioner Cox was a strong contributing contributor to the ultimate design for this. And the goal was to take it away from it being kind of a hard landscaped area and really make expanses of green space, which is saying something because it's elevated above the road. We worked with Site Design, a local landscape firm, who in order to develop this. But the signature piece that we wanted to accomplish was to make a reference back to that history of the rail line and create this path that would basically lead your eye to the opening between the Wrigley buildings and then gently bring you back over in a curve reminiscent of a train line to the Cityfront Plaza Park, which is part of the late 80s development, and Adrian Smith's NBC building and the Cityfront Plaza Park. So these are photographs from late last summer. These aren't renderings. Those are real kids playing out there on the grass, and a real view looking back towards the Wrigley building. There are other minor interventions we had to undertake, notably at the Nathan Hale Courtyard. So Nathan Hale Courtyard was part of that kind of mid-40s reconstruction of the courtyard. His statue was dedicated in the mid-40s. It came to serve as an entry into the Tribune operated a museum for a while. That was the access for. Our client's vision was for the Hill Courtyard to turn into a flagship retail entrance and possible dining terrace. So they were very concerned about visibility. So they wanted to maximize the area and create more visibility. We embraced that by saying, okay, let's take Nathan and let's make him part of the public art along the street, but immediately outside of his courtyard, and have him look back into his courtyard. And we created a mirror polished stainless steel marquee, and we did it in such a way that ultimately some discrete signage could be potentially hung, but we intentionally shaped this so that it was not reflected back towards the surfaces of the building. It would reflect to the street and hopefully kind of go away and not compete too terribly much with the architecture. So there's an aspect of the architecture which I've always appreciated, and it's people's desire to engage tactily with the building itself. And there are two books, both published by the Tribune. One of them, one of the contributors was Blair Kamen for this one in 1968 and 2000. And if you're fortunate to come across a copy of those, it's this wonderful history of all the artifacts and the ornament with stories about each piece. Really worth taking a look at. Not enough time to go into, but needless to say, there are the Stones of the World. That is a program that was started shortly after the tower opened. The mission was, if you were an international reporter, you had to bring back a stone, and it would be installed into the wall. So there's almost 150 of these things. Because we had to basically create all these new openings, larger openings, there was a lot of concern by the historic preservation folks that we would lose these stones. Well, we weren't going to do that. We actually cataloged the stones, put them in storage, and then created a plan for putting them all back up in specific locations. So all the stones that came down all went back up, just in sometimes a slightly different location. The WGN Studios were there on the corner for years and years. One of the public art pieces that we saved was a dedication monument to Jack Brickhouse, very famous sports broadcaster in Chicago. We've moved him a little bit, but we basically rebuilt everything and gave him a place of honor in the new Pioneer Court. And then there's the Aesop screen, wonderful piece of architectural sculpture. If you ever get a chance to read about it, please do, but each one of those figures has a very, very specific meaning. And then there's the Chicago Tribune sign. Another interesting story behind this. As part of the sale of the building, the sign was included. Then Tribune apparently rethought that decision. And there was a period of time where the sign wasn't going to go back. But to Lee Golub's credit, he fought that. They actually went to court. And I won't get into the specifics of the settlement, but the sign came back. It's interesting that it's actually all the same 1964 letter forms, but we had to completely rebuild them. The sign was taken down, shipped to a company up outside of Milwaukee, and completely restored, kind of like doing body work on a car. But the lighting inside of it was revised so that when you were inside the pool, all you saw was sort of an edge glow around the sign, so it's a little bit more subtle. But it is in the tradition of architectural artifacts, and it's kind of pairs with the Drake sign, which is at the other end of Michigan Avenue. And then we're going to close, I think. Yeah, we're going to close on where we began in 1920 with the discovery of that stone. That stone was lost. That's the original corner dedication stone that was part of the original plant building in 1920. Through various remodelings, reconstructions, reuses of the stone got buried. One day we got a call from the field. Hey, guess what we found? We found this. So that sort of prompted us to say, well, we should really commemorate this. So we did a little plaque, which you can see at the top. We found the stone. We reinstalled it almost exactly in the same location, but while this was at Lower Water Street, we raised it vertically up to the Pioneer Plaza level, so that's almost exactly in the same place. And if you ever have the opportunity to go over there and you go find this, which is at the sort of southeast corner, you'll see the original stone and then a plaque which we did, which locates all the original dedication stones for each of the 4 buildings. So just before we get into closing up here and your questions, I just wanted to recognize the entire project team, CIM, SCB, Vinci Hamp, our structural engineers, in particular, exterior enclosure and facade restoration, Wish Jenny and Klein and Hoffman. And although we don't have slides, and I was actually kind of trying to find some this morning, do take the opportunity, if you can, to be down there on a holiday and take a look at the work that Schuler and Shook has done with the complete and stunning relighting of the Chicago Tribune Tower. It's just amazing at night. So thank you very much, and if there are any questions, we'll be happy to try to answer them.
Questions?
Yeah.
The surroundings. this has to do with the plaza. What happened to the headline, the bronze plaques that used to be on the outside of the wall? That's one question. Do you know what you know what I'm referring to? And also, what happened to the plaza, to the WGN Walk of Fame?
First question. The first iteration of the recladding, I think what you're referring to is the first iteration of the recladding of the plant building had a series of plates which were famous headlines. Is that what you're referring to? That's a great question. We'd love to know the answer to that. We'd love to know the answer to that. I think we saw a few of them in the, they weren't there when the building was purchased, just so you know. They just, at that point in time, I don't know how long those openings were there, but at a certain point in time, there was a new series of openings that were put in, and I believe that's the point in time at which they went away. So that's a great question. The second question about the stones along the walk. Ownership, we tried to designate an area where those stones would be relocated. But WGN, I think there was disagreement between ownership and WGN as to who those stones ultimately belong to. But as part of the artifact program, one of the original designs for Pioneer Plaza had a zone where those were all relocated.
Directly to the east of the property is a large space that's, I think, still undeveloped. What are the plans for that? Because that, any kind of building that would go up there would certainly block the great design work in creating the third floor garden area and that space. Everybody looking to the east.
Okay. So the Tribune redevelopment that you see here is part of a larger planned development. In order to secure all the permissions to do what you saw here, particularly with Pioneer Plaza, there was a competition sponsored by the Developers International in the same kind of spirit as the original one for that design. And there he is, Pete Wiseman. Adrian Smith, Gordon Gill were the successful designers. And so if you'll see that there is a 1,473 foot, I think, tower planned for that site. But there's a very important aspect of the overall zoning requirements that protect the view to the Tribune Tower. It's called the Tribune Tower View Corridor. It registers with the width of the Ogden Slip, which is about 100 feet. And if you're driving up Lakeshore Drive and you get abreast of Ogden Slip, you'll look back and you'll see that there's a preserved view cone corridor that actually looks straight at the tower. And nothing can be built within that view corridor up to a height of about 100 feet or so. So the design is for the tower is pushed back, and the height directly in front of the Tribune Tower is limited to preserve the views out. There's a question back here. Now, that's a great question. The Streeterville area is very, very active. And we worked with SOAR, which is a community organization there, to develop a plan for improving the quality of the streetscape at the lower level. One of the slides that I showed you earlier was the entry to the garage, the motor court, with a very exuberant kind of driveway and lighting features. That approach really animates the south side of the building, but all along the west side of the tower and the north along Lower Michigan Avenue, and the north side of the tower along Illinois, that was all completely scrubbed down. The sidewalks were basically any protrusions into the sidewalk from the buildings, those protrusions were eliminated, and the thing was completely relit so that it feels much safer down there. And then as part of the planning permissions for the building that would go to the east, those same sets of requirements exist.
That was great, Steve. Thanks. You know the units in the crown, the highest level units, is that the one elevator that goes all the way up there?
It is.
Only one fire. How did you get away with one fire stair in there, or is there two?
It's two. The two original stairs are backed up to each other and on the east side of the building. So the thing I was complimenting Larry on earlier was his ability to persuade the city to let us keep those two stairs. Because if they made us if they would have required us to rebuild those stairs, we probably would not have been able to use that floor because it would have just consumed the entire floor. And there is the one magic elevator that, it's a special kind of elevator, so called destination dispatch. It's not like you get on an elevator and push a button. You got a little fob, you get on it, you put your fob in, and the elevators only let you go to a certain floor. So the only way that you can get to that floor is if you've got the security permission to go to that floor.
Does it open straight into the unit, or does it open into a lobby?
Pardon me?
Does that elevator open straight into the unit, or does
Yes.
it open straight to the unit?
Yeah, it does. There's also, just since you're interested, there's a little side story to that as well. In addition to that elevator, another service elevator was placed in. I didn't talk about it, but it allows you to physically move in. You take the service elevator up to a mezzanine level, and then you move around to a new elevator. That elevator opens up through a magic door into the unit. It's like a wall slides away and the elevator opens into it so that you can move big stuff in and out.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'm a realtor, and I was so fortunate one day to take one of our clients to go see one of the last like one-bedroom units in the tower, and it was breathtaking. It was really beautiful. I'm so glad that I was scheduled that day. But because of how large, it was like a one-bedroom, 1.5 bath unit, and the client wanted to know, could she make any modifications because the closet space was so large and ample. She swore that she could make that one-bedroom unit into a 2-bedroom unit if she really tried. So what is the process if one of the owners wanted to modify the interior of the spaces?
They just have to work through the sales office and the homeowners association to pursue that modification. Yeah. We started emptying out the building in 2016, and the short answer is, yeah, there were some that were in there for a little while, particularly at the ground floor, but basically they were all out because although you couldn't see it, we probably were doing interior demolition for close to a year, just trying to clean the interior of the building out. Yeah.
Does the Tribune company in any way have any connection to it now, or did
No.
it just maintain the name? That's interesting that it maintained the name and didn't get some other name. And were you tempted to buy and didn't buy into the building?
Well, tempted and able are two different things.
Actually, on that note, like, what would be the lowest price and the highest price?
I wouldn't be able to comment. Yes.
So as we're talking about money, what did the development company pay for the building, and how much did they put into the massive renovation of it? I mean, just the windows alone are astounding.
I honestly, I don't know the answers to those questions. You know, some things you focus on, some things you say. If I knew the answer to that question, I might not propose some of the things I propose.
The Stones of the World. So when I believe it's the WGN building to the north side, when the original tower was built, did the Stones of the World go on Illinois Street also?
They did.
And then were they moved when that building was constructed, the addition? Do you know?
Our addition?
No, when the
I think it was
They
just,
did
I
the
think it just sort of grew as the building grew. You know, there's a document in the 1968 brochure that locates all of the stones of the world along all three sides at that point in time. So I think they were just kind of putting them in as they became available.
Is that still in print? Do you know if that's still in print?
Excuse me?
Do you know if that's still in print? The books on the Stones of the World?
I don't know. I don't know. I think if you, I think if you just Google it, you probably would see some hits on, eBay or something like that.
Hi.
Hi.
With the move out of the Tribune Tower and with the Tribune printing facility suggested as a casino, where is the Tribune going?
Another great question. That is, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't even begin to know the answer to that.
Any other questions?
How many people were involved in the design process with SCB over the course of this project?
Oh, I think at the very beginning it starts small, then it ramps up, and then it starts to kind of come back down. But I would say, Jeff, where were we? About 20 people, 25 people? The project manager sitting back there.
Any other questions? All right, Steve, thank you.
Well, thank you.
So much for coming.
Thank you. There's one comment I want to make because I think it's an important comment, and I should have been with it enough to remember to say it. But the thing that we all came to understand that was very important for SCB is that when you walk by this building today, if you were familiar with the building from before, you should think that nothing had ever happened to it. It's just like it was, when you knew the building before, and you know, I want everyone here to know that's you know, we were ultimately able to convince our client that that was the right way to do this, and I'd like to think we achieved that.